From Ashes to Empire. Part 1, The Fall. I never saw it coming. Maybe that's what made Marcus's betrayal so devastating, the complete blind side of it all. 5 years of building our marketing agency together, of late nights and early mornings, of celebrating each new client and consoling each other through every setback. 5 years of what I thought was partnership. Rebecca, we need to talk. Those words still echo in my mind, delivered with that peculiar blend of rehearsed concern and barely concealed excitement. I remember the setting perfectly. Our favorite coffee shop, neutral territory. Always a bad sign. I was stirring my cappuccino, already sensing something was off. Marcus had been distant for weeks, canceling our usual strategy lunches, holding meetings I wasn't invited to. But nothing prepared me for what came next. I've decided to take the company in a new direction, he said, leaning forward with practiced sincerity. The board agrees it's time for a change in leadership. The board, our 3-person board consisting of Marcus, me, and his college roommate Jake, who I'd stupidly allowed Marcus to bring on when we needed additional investment. The same Jake who barely showed up to quarterly meetings and whose contribution amounted to little more than occasionally liking our company posts on LinkedIn. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. You're brilliant at the creative side, Becca. Everyone knows that. But as we scale, we need someone with more financial acumen. His eyes flicked away as he delivered the line he'd clearly practiced. The board voted yesterday. I'm buying out your share. I stared at the paper he slid across the table. The amount was insulting. Less than a third of what my 49% stake was actually worth. I had built the client list from nothing. I had created our award-winning campaigns. I had trained every designer and copywriter on our team. This isn't legal, I said, pushing the paper back. And it certainly isn't right. Marcus sighed, as if I was being the unreasonable one. The operating agreement gives the board final say on matters of leadership and compensation. You signed it. Yes, I had signed it. In the heady days of our first major client win, when we'd moved out of my garage and into actual office space, when I trusted Marcus implicitly, when I thought we were friends. You need to leave the office by the end of the week, he added, not quite meeting my eyes. HR will coordinate. HR, a single part-time administrator who reported directly to Marcus. One more thing, he said, and for the first time, I caught a glimpse of guilt crossing his face. Landstar is officially our client now. The deal closed this morning. Landstar, my biggest lead. The Fortune 500 company I'd been courting for over a year, through countless lunches and presentation revisions. The client that would have put us on the map nationally. You knew this was coming when we pitched them last month, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. That's why you insisted on handling the final negotiation alone. He didn't deny it. He didn't have to. The slight flush on his neck told me everything. I walked out of that coffee shop numb. 5 years of my life, my client relationships, my creative portfolio, my financial security, all gone in a 15-minute conversation over cooling cappuccinos. That night, I cried until there was nothing left. Then, as the first gray light of dawn filtered through my bedroom window, something hardened inside me. A resolve crystallized, clear and cold. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I would rebuild. I would succeed. And someday, somehow, Marcus would regret the day he decided to cross me. Part 2, The Wilderness. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life. I moved out of my downtown apartment into a tiny studio in a less desirable part of the city. I sold my car. I picked up freelance design work at rates I would have scoffed at a year earlier. I lived on ramen and discount produce and favors from friends who hadn't drifted away when my social media went quiet. But in those months of struggle, I was also planning, watching, learning. I saw Marcus rebrand our agency, my agency, with a slick new logo and website that erased any trace of me. I saw him hire a team of young, hungry marketers straight out of college, eager to work 60-hour weeks for the prestige of the Landstar account. I saw him get written up in the local business journal under the headline, Young Entrepreneur Disrupts Marketing Landscape. It stung. Every social media post, every press mention, Every time I ran into a former client who awkwardly mentioned they were still with Apex, the agency's new name, felt like salt in a wound that refused to heal. But I also saw something else. Something Marcus, in his rush to scale and impress, had overlooked. He was losing the creative edge that had made our agency special in the first place. The campaigns were becoming formulaic. The personal touch with smaller clients was disappearing. The cultural marketing insights that had been my specialty were being replaced with generic, data-driven approaches that looked slick but lacked soul. I noticed this most clearly when Apex launched Landstar's new campaign. It was technically proficient but emotionally empty, exactly the kind of corporate marketing the CMO at Landstar had always said she hated. I wondered how long the relationship would last. Meanwhile, I was surviving. Barely, but surviving. My apartment became a war room of sorts. One wall covered in sticky notes detailing potential clients, another tracking industry trends and patterns. I immersed myself in new technologies and platforms that Marcus had always dismissed as too experimental. I reconnected with Elena, my college roommate who'd gone on to become a high-powered finance executive. Over drinks one night, she paid. I confided the full story. So basically, he screwed you because he could, she summarized bluntly, signaling for another round. Pretty much, I admitted. The operating agreement was ironclad. Elena's eyes narrowed. Operating agreements protect companies, not necessarily the people who happen to be running them at any given time. Send it to me. I know some people. 2 weeks later, I was sitting across from Patricia Winters, a sharp-eyed attorney whose specialty was exactly the kind of corporate malfeasance I'd experienced. You have a case, she said after reviewing my documents. Not a slam dunk, but definitely a case. The lowball valuation alone gives us leverage. I can't afford a legal battle, I confessed. Patricia smiled. It wasn't entirely comforting. Let's just say I've been looking for a chance to go up against Simmons and Wright, the firm representing Marcus. We can work something out on the payment. But first, tell me, what do you actually want out of this? I'd thought about little else for months. I want what's fair. I want recognition for what I built. And I hesitated, then decided to be honest. I want him to know what it feels like to have everything taken away. Patricia nodded slowly. Revenge is expensive, Ms. Reynolds, and rarely as satisfying as people hope. But justice, that we might be able to manage. The lawsuit we filed was narrow in scope but devastating in implication. We didn't go after the company directly. We went after the board's fiduciary responsibility in approving a buyout that significantly undervalued a major stakeholder's share. We specifically named Jake, Marcus's rubber stamp board member, in the filing. The effect was immediate. Jake, whose actual job was at a prominent investment firm, wanted nothing to do with a lawsuit that questioned his financial judgment. Within days, he was calling me directly, bypassing both our lawyers. I didn't know, he kept saying. Marcus just said it was a standard restructuring. I never saw the actual valuation reports. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The case never went to court. After 2 tense months of back and forth, Marcus agreed to a settlement, a proper valuation of my shares, nearly 5 times his original offer, a formal acknowledgement of my role as co-founder in all company materials, and most importantly to me, a non-compete clause that worked both ways. He couldn't approach my clients once I established my own business again. It wasn't revenge, but as Patricia had suggested, it was justice. And it gave me something more valuable than satisfaction. It gave me a fresh start with capital to back it up. Part 3, The Rise. Here's what Marcus never understood about me. I wasn't just good at making pretty designs or writing clever copy. I understood people. I could read a room, sense shifts in culture before they became trends, anticipate what clients needed before they could articulate it themselves. And I understood something fundamental about the marketing landscape that he didn't. The future belonged to the specialists, not the generalists. While Marcus was busy trying to make Apex into a full-service agency for anyone with a checkbook, I took my settlement money and launched Prism Strategy, a boutique firm focusing exclusively on helping established companies connect with millennial and Gen Z audiences authentically. My years of understanding cultural nuance, combined with my newfound expertise in emerging social platforms, created a unique value proposition. We wouldn't handle your entire marketing strategy, just the part most traditional agencies were failing miserably at. I rented a small but stylish office space and hired 3 key people: a digital native content creator with a massive TikTok following, a data analyst who specialized in social sentiment, and a project manager who'd recently left a major agency out of frustration with their outdated approaches. Our first client came through Elena's network, a financial services company desperate to shed its stuffy image. Our campaign, centered around demystifying investment concepts through cleverly animated short-form videos, drove more new account signups in 3 months than their previous agency had managed in a year. Word spread, not in the traditional business networks that Marcus cultivated, but in the digital spaces where marketing directors admitted their struggles to connect with younger consumers. Our portfolio grew: a legacy furniture brand, a regional banking chain, a consumer packaged goods company trying to reinvent itself. We stayed small by design, taking on only clients where we could make a measurable impact, charging premium rates for specialized work rather than discounting to win volume. Quality over quantity became our unspoken mantra. 18 months after launching, we won our first major industry award, not for visual design or copywriting, but for most innovative use of emerging platforms, a new category that might as well have been created for us. I posted a single photo of the award on LinkedIn with the caption, "Grateful for new beginnings and the wisdom that only comes through challenges. Hashtag onward and upward." Marcus viewed it within minutes. He didn't like or comment. By the 2-year mark, Prism had a wait list of potential clients and had tripled our initial revenue projections. We'd moved to a larger office and expanded to a team of 12, still tiny by industry standards, but with a reputation that far outweighed our size. And then came the call I'd been both expecting and dreading. Landstar was looking for a new agency. Part 4, The Reckoning. The Landstar RFP request for proposal arrived in my inbox on a Tuesday morning. The sender was Claire Donovan, the CMO who had been so excited about working with me before Marcus pushed me out. "Thought you might be interested," was all her email said. I stared at it for a long time. This was the client that had been the catalyst for my downfall, the whale Marcus had used to justify my expendability. Pursuing them would bring me full circle, putting me directly in competition with Apex for the first time since our split. It was tempting, so tempting to go all in, to throw everything we had at winning this account just to see the look on Marcus's face when he lost his flagship client to me. But I had learned some things in the wilderness. I called a team meeting. "We have an opportunity," I said, pulling up the RFP on our conference room screen. "A big one. But before we decide whether to pursue it, I want an honest assessment. Does this actually align with what we do best? Or would we be chasing it for the wrong reasons?" For the next hour, we dissected the RFP. Landstar wanted a complete marketing overhaul, traditional campaigns, digital presence, the works. Only about 30% of the scope aligned with our specialty. To pitch it properly, we'd need to either partner with another agency or promise capabilities we'd have to build from scratch. "We could do it," said Jason, my content director, excitement in his voice. "This would put us in a different league." "It would also change who we are," countered Mia, our operations lead. "We've become exactly the kind of general agency we've defined ourselves against." I listened to the debate, remembering how Marcus and I had chased bigger and bigger clients without always considering if they were the right clients. How the pursuit of growth for growth's sake had ultimately changed the company's DNA and made me expendable in his eyes. "Let's sleep on it," I said finally. "This isn't a decision to make in an afternoon." That night, I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. I looked up Marcus on social media. His personal profiles were filled with the trappings of success: speaking at conferences, posing with industry celebrities, humble bragging about Apex's rapid growth. The company now had over 50 employees and had opened a second office in Chicago. But there were signs of stress too. Job postings for key positions that seemed to turn over frequently. Client testimonials mainly from newer, smaller accounts rather than established ones. And reading between the lines of local business news, it appeared they had taken on significant debt to fund their expansion. The next morning, I made my decision. We would not pursue the Landstar account, at least not as presented in the RFP. Instead, I drafted a different kind of proposal to Claire, one that stayed true to Prism's identity. We're not the right agency to handle everything you're looking for, I wrote honestly. But we are the best at this specific piece that's been challenging you. I outlined a targeted proposal focused only on their Gen Z engagement strategy, suggesting they maintain another agency of record for the rest of their marketing needs. It was risky. Most companies preferred a one-stop solution, but it was authentic to who we were and what we did best. Claire called me directly the next day. "This is the most refreshing proposal I've never asked for," she said, amusement in her voice. "Everyone else is promising they can do everything. You're the only one setting boundaries. We've built our reputation on doing one thing exceptionally well," I replied. "I'm not willing to compromise that, even for Landstar." There was a pause, and then, "What if I told you we're actually considering breaking up our marketing needs among specialized agencies? That the whole integrated agency approach hasn't been working for us." 2 weeks later, we signed a contract with Landstar, not for their entire marketing strategy, but for exactly the specialized portion I had proposed. The fees were still substantial, making it one of our largest accounts, but without requiring us to become something we weren't. I later learned that Apex had pitched aggressively to retain the whole account, even offering significant fee reductions. They'd kept a portion of the business, the traditional marketing components, but had lost the digital and youth engagement strategy to us. It wasn't the complete defeat I might once have fantasized about, but in many ways, this was better. We weren't just taking their place, we were changing the rules of the game. Part 5, the recognition. 3 years to the day after Marcus had delivered his betrayal over coffee, I found myself preparing for a very different kind of meeting. The American Marketing Association had named me Entrepreneur of the Year, and a local business magazine wanted an interview for their cover story. We met at the same coffee shop where my old life had ended. A small, petty choice on my part, but satisfying nonetheless. The reporter was young and clearly had done her homework. "Your trajectory is fascinating," she began, "especially the way you narrowed your focus when everyone else was diversifying. What made you take that approach?" I considered the sanitized, media-friendly answer, then decided on honesty instead. "Necessity," I admitted. After leaving my previous agency, I couldn't compete on scale, so I had to find value in specialization instead. We talked for nearly 2 hours about the evolution of Prism, our unique approach, and where I saw the industry heading. She seemed particularly interested in our company culture, how we maintained our creative edge while growing deliberately and sustainably to 20 employees. "We don't measure success by headcount," I explained. "We measure it by impact, both for our clients and our team members." As we were wrapping up, she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Any comment on your split with Marcus Reynolds at what was then Reynolds and Partners?" Industry rumors suggest it wasn't amicable. I'd rehearsed this answer carefully. Business partnerships end for many reasons. I'm grateful for what I learned during that time, and even more grateful for the opportunity to build something that truly reflects my values. The reporter looked disappointed at my diplomatic response, but pressed on. "And your thoughts on Apex's recent struggles? I understand they've laid off nearly 20% of their staff and closed their Chicago office." This was news to me. I'd stopped keeping tabs on Marcus and Apex after the Landstar partial win, choosing to focus on our path rather than theirs. The revelation sent an unexpected pang through me. Not satisfaction, as I might once have expected, but something more complex. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and found that I meant it. This industry can be volatile, especially when growth outpaces sustainability. As the interview ended and the photographer set up for some portraits, my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. A connection request from Marcus Reynolds. I nearly dropped my phone. With slightly shaking hands, I opened the app to find not just a connection request, but a direct message. "Rebecca, I saw you're being featured in Nashville Business Journal. Congratulations. It's well-deserved. If you're open to it, I'd welcome the chance to talk sometime. There's much I've reflected on over the years. Marcus, 5 years ago, I would have killed for this moment, for any acknowledgement from him that I had succeeded despite his best efforts to ensure I wouldn't. 3 years ago, I might have ignored the message entirely, too wounded to engage. 1 year ago, I might have accepted with cool professionalism while maintaining emotional distance. But now, I studied my reflection in the coffee shop window as the photographer adjusted her equipment. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me, confident, successful, at peace with her choices. I had built something meaningful on my own terms. I had proven my worth, not just to the industry, but to myself. Marcus's validation, once so desperately wanted, now felt almost irrelevant. I typed a response, "Thank you, Marcus." Life has a way of taking unexpected turns, doesn't it? Coffee sometime might be interesting. I'll be in touch when my schedule opens up next month. Not a yes, not a no. Just an acknowledgement that the past was the past, and that whatever happened next would be on my terms, not his. The magazine came out the following week. I was prepared for the professional recognition, the client calls, the industry attention. What I wasn't prepared for was the flood of messages from women entrepreneurs who saw themselves in my story, women who had been underestimated, sidelined, or pushed out, but who had found ways to rebuild and redefine success. I began receiving speaking invitations, not just about marketing strategy, but about resilience and reinvention. A prominent business school asked me to guest lecture on entrepreneurship. A national women's leadership conference requested a keynote. Prism continued to thrive, maintaining our specialized focus while selectively adding complementary service areas. We opened a small satellite office in Austin, headed by Mia, who had proven herself more than ready for greater leadership responsibility. 6 months after the magazine feature, I received an email that made me laugh out loud in its perfect circularity. Jake, Marcus's former board ally, wanted to invest in Prism's next phase of growth. "I've been following your success," he wrote, "and I believe in your vision for where specialized marketing is headed. No strings, no board seat requirements. Just a straight investment in what I consider the future of the industry." I forwarded it to Patricia, my attorney, with the subject line, "The universe has a sense of humor." Her response came within minutes, poetic justice at its finest. Should I set up a call? I thought about it. There was something undeniably satisfying about the symmetry, the man who had helped push me out now wanting back in on my terms. But I had learned to be strategic rather than reactive. "Let's discuss," I replied, "but only if the terms make sense for Prism, not for my ego." Part 6, the reunion. When the invitation to my 15-year college reunion arrived, my first instinct was to ignore it. I had never been one for nostalgic gatherings, and my college experience had been more about getting through than enjoying the journey. Working multiple jobs while carrying a full course load, always slightly out of place among wealthier classmates. But something made me reconsider. Perhaps it was turning 40 the month before, or the realization that I now had achievements worth sharing. Perhaps it was simply curiosity about the paths others had taken. Whatever the reason, I found myself on a crisp October weekend walking across the quad of my alma mater, name tag affixed, bracing myself for the inevitable small talk. "Rebecca Reynolds? Oh my God, it's really you." I turned to see Amber Collins rushing toward me, arms outstretched. In college, Amber had been the effervescent social butterfly, always at the center of every event, party, and campus tradition. We had been friendly, but never close, existing in different orbits of campus life. "I was hoping you'd be here," she gushed, embracing me. "I've been following your success. That profile in Marketing Week was incredible." "Thanks," I said, genuinely surprised by her enthusiasm. "It's good to see you, Amber. What are you up to these days?" "Oh, the usual," she waved dismissively. "Marketing director for a healthcare system in Charlotte. Nothing as exciting as founding a cutting-edge agency. But I love it." As she guided me toward the reception, I was struck by how differently I experienced this interaction than I would have even 5 years ago. There was no need to compare accomplishments, no internal scorekeeping. We were simply two professionals catching up. The reunion cocktail reception was held in the business school atrium, now named after some donor I didn't recognize. I circulated through clusters of former classmates, exchanging brief updates and business cards. Some had achieved impressive career heights. Others had chosen family focus or creative pursuits over corporate advancement. All seemed to be assessing each other with that peculiar mix of curiosity and comparison that reunions inevitably inspire. I was at the bar waiting for a glass of wine when I heard his voice, the famous Rebecca Reynolds. I thought that might be you. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. David Mercer, the golden boy of our business program. The one who had dismissively told me during a group project that I didn't have what it takes to succeed in a competitive industry. The one whose casual cruelty had both wounded me deeply and fueled countless late nights of determination. I turned slowly, glass in hand. David, how nice to see you. He looked essentially the same, still handsome in that polished, conventional way, though with less hair and more weight around the middle. His smile was confident, his handshake firm. I've been seeing your name everywhere lately, he said. Quite the success story. Thank you, I replied simply. And you? What path did you take? A flicker of something, discomfort? Resentment crossed his face before he recovered with a broad smile. Oh, you know how it goes. Started in investment banking, moved to private equity. Now I'm primarily doing independent consulting while I figure out my next move. Translation: between jobs, I surmised, remembering how to read between the lines of business euphemisms. Fascinating, I said. The industry is certainly in flux. Speaking of which, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. I've actually been considering a pivot into the marketing space. Given your obvious expertise, perhaps we could discuss potential collaboration opportunities? My client network combined with your creative approach could be quite synergistic. There it was. Not just professional courtesy, but an angle. Some things never changed. I smiled, remembering a younger Rebecca who would have been flattered by this attention from someone who had once dismissed her, who might have eagerly pursued the validation of a partnership with the person who had said she didn't have what it takes. I appreciate the interest, David, but Prism is actually quite selective about our partnerships. We're fully booked with clients who align with our specialized approach. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. Just thought I'd float the idea. Your loss. Ultimately, my connections in the financial sector are unparalleled. I'm sure they are, I said pleasantly, raising my glass in a small toast. Best of luck with your transition. If you'll excuse me, I see my former marketing professor over there. As I walked away, I felt nothing but a calm sense of closure. No vindictive satisfaction, no lingering resentment. Just the quiet confidence of knowing exactly who I was and what I had built. The rest of the reunion weekend passed in a blur of panel discussions, campus tours, and catching up with professors who had once been mentors. I exchanged contact information with several classmates whose professional journeys genuinely interested me, and politely deflected a few more thinly veiled networking attempts from people who had barely acknowledged my existence in college. On the final evening, at the gala dinner, I found myself seated at a table with an eclectic mix of former classmates, including, to my surprise, both David and Marcus. I hadn't known they were acquainted, but they greeted each other with the easy familiarity of old friends. Small world, I murmured to Amber, who had claimed the seat beside me. The smallest, she agreed, nodding toward the two men deep in conversation. Though from what I hear around town, neither of them is doing as well as they'd like everyone to believe. I raised an eyebrow, curiosity getting the better of me. Marcus's agency is on the verge of being acquired, not as a success story, but as a fire sale, she continued, lowering her voice. And David's consulting is what happened after his fund collapsed under SEC scrutiny. Not that either would admit it. I should have felt some satisfaction at this news. These two men had, in different ways, underestimated and undervalued me. Their current struggles could easily be framed as karmic justice, but instead, I felt a strange sense of compassion mixed with clarity. Success and failure weren't endpoints, but way stations on journeys that kept evolving. I had experienced both, and would likely encounter both again in different forms. When Marcus caught my eye across the table and raised his glass in a silent toast, I returned the gesture without hesitation. When David mentioned during dinner that he was open to new opportunities, I sincerely recommended a former classmate's executive recruiting firm. As the evening wound down, I slipped out to the terrace for a moment of quiet. The campus spread out below, autumn trees glowing under strategic lighting, students crossing the quad just as I had 15 years earlier, unaware of the twist their own stories would take. "It's something, isn't it?" came a voice beside me. Marcus had followed me out, hands in his pockets, expression contemplative. Looking back at where it all started, "It is," I agreed, wrapping my wrap tighter against the chill. He hesitated, then, "I owe you an apology, Rebecca. What I did, how I handled everything, it wasn't just business. It was wrong." I studied him in the dim light, searching for the calculated charm that had once been his hallmark. Instead, I found something rarer, genuine regret. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "It matters, even now. Your success has been impressive," he continued. "But more than that, from everything I hear, you've built something authentic, something with integrity." He gave a short, self-deprecating laugh, something I lost sight of somewhere along the way. "It's never too late to find it again," I offered, surprising myself with the sincerity behind the words. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history settling into something lighter. Not friendship, exactly, but a mutual recognition. "I should head back inside," I said eventually. "Early flight tomorrow." He nodded. "Rebecca, for what it's worth, I'm sorry it took me so long to see your value. Some lessons come at a higher price than others." As I walked away, I realized that the closure I'd found wasn't about validation from Marcus or David or anyone else who had once doubted me. It was about understanding that their inability to see my worth had never been the defining factor in my story. The defining factor had been my refusal to let their perception become my reality. Epilogue, the legacy. 5 years after the reunion, Prism Strategy was acquired by a global holding company. Not in a desperate fire sale, but from a position of strength and vision. The terms allowed us to maintain our unique culture and specialized focus while gaining resources to expand our impact. I stayed on as CEO of the Prism division for 2 years, then stepped into an innovation role across the larger organization, helping other agencies rediscover their authentic value in a constantly shifting landscape. Marcus eventually rebuilt a smaller, more focused agency of his own, finding a niche in crisis communications. We occasionally crossed paths at industry events, maintaining a cordial professional relationship that acknowledged our complicated history without being defined by it. David ultimately left the business world entirely, opening a surprisingly successful artisanal brewery in Vermont. His LinkedIn profile now proudly proclaimed him a recovering finance bro, which made me smile every time I saw it. On the 10th anniversary of Prism's founding, I launched a venture fund specifically supporting women entrepreneurs who were rebuilding after setbacks, professional or personal. We called it Phoenix Capital with the tagline, "Every ending is a beginning in disguise." Our first investment was in a marketing technology platform founded by a woman who had been pushed out of her C-suite role during a corporate merger. Within 18 months, her company's valuation had tripled. When people ask me now about the secret to my success, I no longer give the expected answers about determination or vision or even specialized expertise. Instead, I tell them the truth. I learned that betrayal can be a gift if you let it show you who you really are when everything else is stripped away. I learned that other people's limitations aren't your own unless you accept them. And I learned that success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Sometimes the greatest triumph isn't in defeating your opponents, but in transcending the battle altogether, in building something so meaningful that the old wounds no longer define you. In the end, living well truly is the best revenge, but living authentically, that's the best legacy. The end.